Welcome, everyone. Welcome to week 2. Thanks for coming back. For those of us who joined us last week, we covered a lot of ground and we're excited to chat with you again today about growing your dinner. A little bit about me. I'm Sonia Zamborski. I am the Communications Director for Sustainability Matters, and I'm one of your lovely panelists today. As you can see here, I've been encouraging people to eat their veggies since the early 70s and serving up Prairie Court luxe as I'm getting you to eat your veggies. Very fashionable. I think I've gone downhill from there. That was my peak, but I am still growing veggies. I started in, learned from my mom in Eastern Pennsylvania, and just learned the magic of putting seeds in the ground and food comes out. I always thought that was fantastic. So now I'm in Falls Church, Virginia, in Zone 7. And as you can see here, I'm still enjoying getting my hands dirty, and I do edible landscaping, which is really just a fancy way of saying I grow veggies in my front yard. And I also have been getting more into planting natives to support pollinators. So that's been one of the great things that I've learned through Sustainability Matters. And I wanted to share a study that I just found the other day that shows that small gardens are helpful for supporting pollinators and bees and bee conservation. You might think, oh, I just have a tiny little deck or a tiny little garden and I'm not going to make a difference. You will. Every contribution counts, and the patchwork of resources for bees is more important than ever. So thank you for considering helping the bees and helping your family. On that note, you may recall this cat from last week. This is my nephew, Jack, at age about 2 or so. I am happy to say that he's gotten a lot taller. He's 12 now. He still loves eating his kale, and he and his sister Josie are out in San Diego, and Josie is here featured with some broccoli that they grew in their backyard recently, and some teeny tiny schmeeny little carrots. She and I were discussing the merits of marketing those as carrot bites. So the whole family's involved, the next generation, and so that is part of really getting excited about growing your dinner, is that your family can get involved and have fun as well. So let's take a quick look at what we talked about. Last week, we went through some nutrition and the dinner part of Grow Your Dinner. We talked about some gardening fundamentals and talked about some example crops, which we're going to expand on a little bit more this week. So if you feel like it, please tell us in chat what your favorite, most useful tip was that you learned from last time. And it could be something that you learned from us as one of the presenters, or it's one of your other participants. There was lots of great conversation happening in chat. So if you learned something really cool that you're excited about, pop it into that chat so we can see what you're jazzed about. So there are these, 3 types of gardens, and if you were with us last time and filled out the poll, it looked like there was a kind of an even split between these 3. And a lot of times you'll use all 3. They all have their pros and cons. They're helpful for certain things and have some limitations as well. So containers, great for small spaces, including on your balcony, your deck, and you can put them on your front stoop. I have some pots on my front stoop. You can mix them in with your other beds to add some texture. You're going to need to use potting soil if you have containers, and ideally mix with a good bit of compost and some other elements, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But you can move these around to sort of maximize the sun exposure and figure out where the best spot is. And the size of the pot will determine what kinds of veggies you can grow in that pot, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later as well. Raised beds, great way to use a part of your yard where the soil isn't so ideal. You can also put them on paved surfaces if you have a liner there. They do require quite a bit of bagged soil and compost, but you can build them out of almost anything. Untreated lumber, bales of straw, other found materials. And they're a great way to have extra space that you might not have, where the ground isn't so great. And then of course we have in-ground. It's the simplest, work with what you got. You may need to amend your soil. We talked about this a little bit last time. Amending soil just means mixing in something to help make the soil either fluffier or give it nutrients. We recommend compost, amending your soil with compost. You'll hear us talk about that a lot. And we do have composting with the Clueless. We did this last year, and it will be coming up again in May. So if you're not sure how to compost, come back and join us. We can tell you some more about that. But compost is good for all kinds of things. And the other thing about growing in the ground is that you can convert your grass which we're not super fans of because it takes a lot of resources. But you can convert your turf grass to in-ground beds via something called the Lasagna Method, which we will talk about in a bit. Quick review, we talked about this last time. I'm not going to go into it in detail again, but just to let you know that, no matter what kind of garden, where you're gardening, you're still going to have to consider sun, water, and terrain. Those are kind of the main factors. And our friend the Scarecrow here reminds us that those are important regardless of which type of garden you're using. So thinking about the site selection where you're going to grow perhaps these lovely rainbow tomatoes, there are a few things to keep in mind. You want to make sure that you have a site with at least 6 hours of sun, more is better. And particularly if you're growing veggies and fruit, you want to have lots of sun. You need to have access to water because you can lug buckets around, but it gets really heavy and it's not so fun to drag those garden hoses around. So somewhere where you're near a water source, could be a hose, could be a rain barrel, could be your kitchen sink, but keep that in mind as you're planning. Don't go too far away from that. And then also keep in mind the natural water that you're going to get from the sky, depending on where you are in the country, and make sure that you have enough drainage because you really don't want to drown your plants. You don't want to have, unless you're growing a rice paddy, which we will not be talking about today, you really want to have a site with good drainage so that your plants will be happy. And then the other thing is a level surface. You can grow on a slope. It's really hard. And unless you're growing things that are sort of cascading over, you really want to have something level so that, particularly with your containers, that they're not tipping over. But even in ground, that the soil doesn't sort of slide down the hill. So consider a level surface if you really want to have the best choice of garden spots for success. All right, so I mentioned the lasagna method. It's not about growing lasagna, even though that would be fun too. Talk about growing your dinner. The lasagna method is a way to convert grass to a garden bed. And you can use this for raised beds as well as in ground. But basically what you do is you have a barrier that you put down. Cardboard works great. Newspaper, as long as it's a really thick stack of newspaper, to smother the grass and the weeds and put the base down. And then you layer your compostable material on top of that. And again, that's, if you're familiar with composting, that's your greens and browns, but if not, come back to our composting workshop. I'll tell you all about it. But it can be stuff like dried leaves, shredded paper, dryer lint, fresh grass clippings, coffee grounds. We talked about that last time. And so the more layers, the better. I've seen 7 is the recommended. That seems like a lot. A couple of layers will do it. And the smaller the pieces of stuff that's in there, the faster it'll break down. So you put your compostable material in there and water it down, keep it moist, and then be patient. It can take at least 6 months really to break down. A full year is better. So this is something where you'll have to plan. But if you, for example, start in late fall, then by the spring you may have a great new bed to plant into. And if you're planting plants, you can get away with the stuff not breaking down as much. But if you're planting from seed, you really want to make sure that it's crumbly, it looks like dirt that you're planting into. So there's a couple different types of soil. We kind of have soil in quotes because not all these are actual soil. There's germination mix, which is great for starting your seeds. It is usually soilless and has other materials in there. It looks brown and crumbly, but it's not actually dirt. And it's a very light, fluffy, it's a sterile mix. So you're not introducing any diseases or any problems into your little seed babies. And you don't need any fertilizer in there. You'll just pop a seed into it. And you will need to either pot up, which is move to a bigger pot when you've got bigger plants, or add a little bit of fertilizer so that the plants have some nutrients to work with. Then there's potting soil, which is very similar to the germination mix, although it usually has, it's not quite as fine, and it usually has a little bit of fertilizer mixed in there. Sometimes it also contains materials to hold water. And this is great for containers. It can be reused carefully. Again, you don't want to introduce any diseases in there. And we recommend, if you're going to reuse potting soil, that you put a lot of compost in there from year to year. But it's a great way to grow plants in containers or in raised beds if they're small. Garden topsoil is the third option, and that's really for the bigger raised beds. You get it in bigger bags, bigger bulk, and it's also good for adding to your in-ground soil if you've got a lot of clay, if you've got a lot of rocks in there, like Deb does in her rock garden, you can amend with both compost and with this topsoil. And so I mentioned soilless media, and that is a combination of lots of things. It's organic. We used to use peat moss a lot for that. It's not a renewable resource, so we don't use peat as much anymore in these things, but coconut coir, sawdust, straw, and those are also things that you can mix into your potting soil to make them light and fluffy. So why do you want to start from seeds? It takes, you know, a little bit more effort, but I think it pays off. It's my favorite way to grow plants. It's cheaper. A packet of seeds is going to be quite a bit cheaper than buying a new plant. It's forgiving if you make mistakes and need to start over. You know, again, just buy a new packet of seeds. No harm, no fuss, no muss. You get a lot more variety, like this lovely Shakamaxon bean, pole bean, purple bean here. You're going to get a lot more variety from seeds than what you get at your typical box store in particular. And you can start a little bit early. If the ground is cold, but you're planting seeds into a container, you can push a little bit on getting an early start. So it's my favorite way to garden. And there are lots of different places you can get your seeds from. I really have a couple catalog favorites that have really great selection. And in some cases, they're specialty items like these purple King Tut peas that are just gorgeous, and these little yellow gold nugget tomatoes. So you're going to find more variety in those catalogs. And it's a great way to shake off those winter blues in like January or February when it's still too cold. You can flip through your, I call it seed porn, think about things that you might buy and things you might grow. It's inspiration. So, you know, there's lots of them out there. I have a couple favorites. If you have a favorite one, pop them in the chat. But Southern Exposure Seed Exchange is a great one. They're located in Virginia. So if you, like us, are in Virginia, they grow in their test gardens. And so they have a really good catalog of what works well in Virginia. And they're very active in the community as well. Baker Creek is one that their URL is rare seeds for a reason, because they have lots of really fancy schmancy stuff, and it can be a little bit harder to grow. So I don't necessarily recommend them for beginners. But again, for the catalog is beautiful. And they have lots of children running through the fields, and it's great inspiration. So that is another option. And then True Love Seeds is one of my all-time favorites. That's where those Shakamaxon beans came from. They share profits with their growers, and they really focus on community food sovereignty. So they are doing a lot around sustainable agriculture, and just it gives me warm fuzzies to buy from them. So again, feel free, if you got Territorial Seed is a good one, put your favorites in the chat, share with your participants. There's lots and lots of places to get seeds out there, and they're all amazing. They have been actually having some shortages lately as more folks are gardening with the pandemic. So plan early if you can. But if you don't get them from catalogs, there's other places. You can go to your garden center. Organic markets often have some good selections. Mom's is one that has a lot from Southern Exposure. You can go to seed swaps and plant swaps. We're actually hosting one in a bit ourselves. There are lots of places in your area that probably have seed swaps, or you can swap with your friends and make your own seed swap, because you get more seeds in a packet than you probably will need in one season. So get some friends over and share and compare notes, and it can be a lot of fun and a way to bond with your friends. The last thing on here that I wanted to mention is a group called Hands-On Harvests. And if you are in the Northern Virginia area, which a lot of you are, this is a great organization that is, it's built on the grow a row model, which lots of areas have, where you grow an extra row of vegetables to give to your local food bank. Hands-On Harvest has a program where they just got a bunch of seeds donated from moms, actually, and they're giving those out to volunteers who offer to grow extra seedlings and extra produce for the local community. So their URL is in the chat. I recommend checking them out. They also have some good resources on their site for how to grow seeds. Alrighty, so if you get seeds, and especially if you're getting seeds that might have been donated, sometimes those are a little bit older, or if you got them from a friend, you're not really sure if they're gonna work out. Take a look at, if you have the package, there are expiration dates on there to use as a guideline, more of as a rule of thumb, not an absolute. There are some really good viability charts online. It's kind of see like, how long can I keep my lettuce seeds around? So you feel free to kind of check that out as another way of knowing if you should keep them or not. But the method that I often use is this germination test on either a paper towel or a coffee filter, something that can hold water. And so you sort of spread out the paper towel, put the seeds, few seeds on there, fold it in half, and put it in either like a plastic bag or an airtight container, and let them sit for a couple of days and see what happens. And keep in mind that some seeds take a little bit longer than others to germinate, so make sure you're aware of what the timing is. And some seeds need warmth and cold. And so again, look at the package if you have it. But if you put down 5 seeds and they all 5 germinate, you know, those are good to go. If you put 5 seeds out and one of them germinates or none of them, you might not have as much luck. But this is a really great way of testing your seeds before you put them in the ground to see how well they're going to do. Quick note about starting indoors. This is my setup in my basement. It's not for beginners, so we're not going to get into it much here. But if you do have a setup where you have adequate lighting, these are shop lights on timers. That's really the most important thing. We don't recommend that you start indoors because it's tricky. You can't just put things on a windowsill. You'll get plants that are kind of going at a funny angle and they'll get a crick in their neck. For those who are just starting out, we're recommending starting outside. But if you do start indoors, just make sure that you've got a good light source. All right. Types of containers. There are a bunch here, and we talked about this a little bit last time. You can use all different kinds of things to plant in. You don't really need a fancy setup. The size of the container is really going to be dependent on the size of the seed and also the size of the final plant. Are you going to keep it there? Are you going to pot it up into something else? Keep that in mind. The materials, again, using a germination mix or really fine potting soil. This is one of those things where you're going to have to shell out a couple bucks to actually buy, unless you can get them free from a friend. But you know, potting soil or seed starting soil is a really important first step to having happy seedlings. So you're going to want to put the seeds at a depth that depends on the size of the seed, again, and the package will tell you how deep they should go. But a good rule of thumb is like 2 to 3 times the size of the seed. So if it's a big seed, it needs to go deeper. If it's a small seed, sometimes they can just go right on the surface. And some seeds will need light, some prefer darkness. Again, check the package. There's a wealth of information there to give you some guidance on how to get these things started. You are going to want to make sure that the soil that you use is damp but not wet, so that it's not soggy. It's the conventional wisdom is you should be able to sort of clump it in your hand but not squeeze out any extra water. So make sure that the soil is moist, make sure that the seeds are covered unless they're the kind that want to just sort of stay on the surface, and cover up the container with either, if you've got something with a lid, or plastic cling wrap works great. Some seed trays come with a cover. You want to keep those seeds moist until they germinate, and then make sure that you take the cover off when you've got some little friends poking out, so that you don't have, it's not too damp. You can get something called damping off, a fungal disease, if you keep the lid on, if you keep it too moist. So keep an eye on them as they're first starting out. And you can, you know, whether you plant one seed in a very small individual cell, or you do the sort of scatter method and then separate them out later, it's an individual choice as to what works best for you. And then once you do have a germinated plant, you're going to want to add a little bit of fertilizer. Fish emulsion is great. Don't put too much in there, because really the seeds have all the nutrient that they need to germinate. And then once the plant has 2 sets of true leaves is when you're going to think about either putting them in a bigger container or giving them some fertilizer. So don't overdo that right away. Otherwise you'll burn your little seedling and they won't be happy. You don't really need any fancy seed starting equipment. As you can see here, I've got some, you know, plastic old dairy cups and takeout containers. You can, you know, reuse the plastic that you got on hand. Make sure you punch some holes in the bottom for drainage. You can also make paper pots. There's a like this that you kind of wrap the paper around and make a paper pot. That's good for, you know, it's obviously that doesn't last very long, but if you want to germinate some seeds and then put them into a larger container. Paper's great. You can use something called a soil block maker. I've never actually used one of these, but they can be a little bit pricey, but they compress the soil down, but then you don't need any kind of container around it. So that saves time and materials. You can use cardboard egg cartons to start seeds. Toilet paper rolls are great if you cut them in and kind of fold them together at the bottom. There's lots of different ways to, yes, rotisserie chicken containers. Thanks, Margaret. Those are great for seed starting because they come with that plastic top, and usually there's some kind of vent in there. So those are great for, and then they're great. Some of these, probably the bottom trays came from those rotisserie chicken containers. They make a great tray for having bigger pots as well. So excellent. Thanks for that, Margaret. Make sure you label. You're not going to remember what you put where. Take it from me. You are not going to remember unless you label these little babies. So there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. You can write on masking tape and put that on the containers. If it's a white or clear container, you can just write directly on the container itself. Lots of people cut up plastic containers and little strips and write on the strips. That works great. Popsicle sticks are awesome. I don't eat enough popsicles in my house to make that work, but you can see this bok choy is written on a popsicle stick. Wine is something that we do go through a lot of in my house. So wine corks, and I can't take credit for this. I saw this somewhere online, but they are great with put them on a little skewer, which you can get, at the grocery store, and write on them with a marker. And the synthetic ones last longer, but you can do this with cork too. Sometimes I find that the squirrels like to nibble on the cork. But for one season, they're fine and making one of the compost. And you're not going to write all of the information ever, discovered about the plant, but just a little bit of a reminder of what the heck this thing is, and pop it in there. Make sure that you label. And if anybody has any other ideas for labels, feel free to put those in chat. I've seen some really creative things. I had a friend who used toothpicks and masking tape, which made little teeny tiny flags. So if you have any label ideas that have worked really well for you, let us know. Put it in the chat. Let us hear your creativity. Yes, window blinds is one that I think somebody mentioned last time too. Those can work really well. Post-it tape, yes. All right, so protecting your little plant friends. This meme was from 2 years ago when we had a really late freeze in like May, and everybody was already panicking because of the pandemic. But then those of us who were plant parents, where plant parenthood is a tough thing, we had to go out there and as Paula says, prowl around and check on our little plant babies to make sure that everything was fine. So whether you dress like Baby Yoda or you're out there in your curlers, you're going to want to keep an eye in the spring, depending on which zone you're in, to make sure that your plants are protected. So here's a couple ideas. And again, we're talking about protection from the cold. We'll be talking about protection from other bugs and blights and things next time. But protection from the cold can be done with row covers. And this is a little bit of a messy version here from my garden, but it's just a thin fabric that I used over the top of the tomato cages. There are tomatoes underneath there somewhere. Sometimes row covers come with a frame and you can poke those into the ground. They work really nicely for protection. And you can also use cold frames, which we'll talk about in a bit and show an example of those. That's basically a sort of a mini greenhouse with a window on top. You can use individual covers. There's a term that's cloche, which is very fancy in French. There's a little cloche here that's a plastic container. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be something that just sort of goes on top of your plants in case there is frost. And you can also mulch them. These grass clippings here are a mulch for both around the tomatoes that are covered and then around these greens that are going to be a little bit hardier, but just to kind of keep them warm, keep them cozy, give them a little bit of a blanket of mulch. And sometimes that will make all the difference. So this is my deck from about mid-April of last year. You can see the state of my craziness, my chaos. Let's take a deeper dive into what's going on here. So towards the back here, you can see the cold frame sort of that I was experimenting with last year was just a little bookshelf turned on its side. And these windows, which I got the whole thing from Habitat Restore for like $20 or something. So the hardest part was getting them home in my mini. which is not meant to haul large items. So that cold frame was great. It raised the temperature about 10 degrees. And so I was able to put some things out and start some things a little earlier. And also when if there was later freezes, I could kind of cover them up. In the foreground here are some gold and yellow buckets from a friend that worked in a bakery. And I was experimenting with drainage on the side versus the bottom. That was a science experiment. But these buckets are great. I got them for free. You want to make sure that whatever was in the bucket was food grade and not chemicals. We talked about that a little bit last time, but these had flour, some kind of bakery materials in them. They're great for starting and also growing. These little friends that are in here grew all season and got to be 6 feet tall. Virginia's favorite newly legal crop got to be giant bushes at the end of the season, still just growing from this one bucket. So that was a super easy way to kind of keep them on the deck in a safe space. There's some soda cups and kind of plastic cups over here. There's a Wendy's near my house, which I don't tend to eat at, but those who come to my house for band practice sometimes stop there. The drummer in particular was very fond of stopping at Wendy's before band practice, and he would bring these giant Slurpee cups, and they are really great for potting up tomatoes because you can kind of put them in and they get really deep roots. So that was what I chose to use them for. There's some solo cups and some other stuff over here too. What else? We've got some window boxes that never made it sort of into any they were meant to be hung over the side of the deck. They're just sticking around here, both wooden and plastic. Those are really great for my kitchen garden. My kitchen is kind of off to the left side of this, so I can pop out at any time of the day or night and get some thyme and parsley and some lettuce and stuff. So those were great for those types of plants. And there are some repurposed back here where the chart is a pot that came from the nursery. There's some of these bigger pots you can buy. They're a little more expensive, but they're pretty durable. They last a while. And in one of these in particular, I stuck some bamboo skewers and was growing peas, and then also grew some squash and cucumbers in there later in the season. So they're pretty versatile, and again, you can kind of move them around. A lot of these plants they're on their way to being moved into the ground. So this chaos it's a different kind of chaos later in the season, but this is just a great example of you can use your deck. If this is where the sun is, you can use it. So let's talk a little bit about planting and making the best use of the space that you have. I don't have a ton of space in my yard. It's a sort of typical suburban lot. And so I really like to plant. I can't have a whole luxurious row of something. I'm going to intercrop and make the most of the space. So companion planting is when you plant several plants together that have similar sun and water needs. And it's a good way to deter pests and sort of share the space. So here in this picture, I think we've got it's a Fresno chili with some salvia, that's the flower, and it's shading this kale that's kind of in the back here. And it's just kind of a nice, fun, color combo as well. Some other Three Sisters, yes, thanks, Joe. That's one of the classic sort of companion examples, which is corn, beans, and squash. And in that case, the corn supports the beans, and the squash provides some, ground cover, and those work well together. Tomatoes and basil is one that I use a lot. I put marigolds everywhere because they deter pests, because they have a funky smell. They're also super drought tolerant, and it's like one of the few things that still looks good in my garden in like August. So marigolds all over the place, and if you're lucky, they'll self-seed and come back over and over again. So, and also nasturtiums and squash is a great combo because those nasturtiums will keep some of the bugs away. We're going to talk about succession planting a little bit when we get to the calendar, but that's the sort of idea of replacing one crop with another. For example, lettuce, where I am in zone 7, gets too hot, right? Like about Mother's Day, lettuce is like, forget it, I'm done, and it bolts. So I pull the lettuce out and I put tomatoes in there, for example, and that works really well. Peas, I was mentioning the peas from the deck get replaced by cucumber because they both need a trellis to grow on. So that's a good sort of succession planting. And you sort of figure out ways to extend the season sometimes by planting things in succession, one after the other. And then, of course, we've got to talk about our pollinator-friendly flowers, which are less about growing your own dinner and more about growing dinner for the pollinators in your neighborhood, which will help you grow your plants because they will pollinate the tomatoes and squash and everything else. And here are just a couple of examples of some pollinator-friendly natives. The orange flower is a tropical milkweed or butterfly weed, and it's meant to be grown for the monarchs, but the bees love it as well, as you can see here. In the middle is the common milkweed, which is also, these are all perennials, and you can see some very happy ladybugs doing their thing on there. They're going to town, and those ladybugs will also eat aphids, which is delightful. And then on the left side is echinacea, which is really easy to grow, also very drought tolerant. And in my yard, the monarchs happen to love that as well, and the other butterflies. So good for you, good for the earth, good for your garden. Consider putting some pollinator friendly plants in there along with your veggies. And oh, one thing I wanted to mention, if you're in Virginia, a great resource for those pollinator friendly natives is plantnovanatives.org. And they have some good suggestions about what to plant in different parts of your yard and where to get natives. So I'm gonna chat for you, check them out for some great info. All right, so my final word for today, or at least for the formal portion of the program, is just experiment and remember, have fun with this. You don't take it too seriously. You can plan, you can educate yourself, you can get all up to speed on all the best practices. Mother Nature is going to have something else in mind, whether it's cicadas, whether it's an unexpected late frost. In my case, the picture that's here is what I refer to as my basement salad. I like to grow lettuce in the basement, and I had some basement mice come and eat my basement salad when I was visiting the family in San Diego recently. I came back from the weekend and they had mowed down, they had eaten the salad bar of everything, all my seedlings that were in the basement. And I had some choice Yosemite Sam verbiage for them in the moment. And then I was just like, all right, good for them. I didn't know mice liked salad, but gotta get the mice taken care of. But I plant from seed. There's more seeds. We're just gonna roll with it. And you gotta maintain your sense of humor because gardening is a humbling pursuit sometimes. It's fun. It's a great way to get your hands dirty, but you gotta also keep your sense of humor going. So with that, I am going to bring up this slide that is just a little reminder of our sort of sample fruits, veggies, and herbs, and invite you to put in the chat what you're excited about growing this year. It could be something from this list, it could be something totally different. These are the sort of easy for beginners and very economical high producer options that we've kind of given you as a starting point. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Paula to talk to us about our garden calendar.
I was wondering if this was a good point to poise and answer a few of the questions that seem to be coming from our participants, or do you want to find out
sure.
what people want to grow?
Yeah, Zoom team, if there's anything that would be good for us to tackle now, we're going to have the questions at the end as well, but if there's anything that makes sense, yep, go ahead, Nan.
Brenda had asked, when I plant seeds, I end up with a tiny, thin 2-inch plant that stays that way for a couple of months and then disappears, even lettuce. How do you get a sturdier plant that will actually grow? I don't have a great track record of, I don't have great light. So anyway, I can't answer that one.
Yeah, that's the first thing is making sure that you have a really good light source. The sun is a good one to start with, and that it could be that if you're starting too early in the season, there's not enough sun, or that it's too cold. Sometimes if you go back to the, let's see if I can do this back to my little friend here. These are really close together to sort of start with. And at some point they needed to be separated out so there was enough space for them to really grow and flourish. So it could be that you're crowding your seeds or your plants. Paula, Deb, you have any other suggestions about what might be happening?
I suggest the light is probably the key issue. It's extremely hard to have light just from the coming in a window to be strong enough, forceful enough to give you the sturdy seedlings you really want. And that's why Sonia's picture with her basement with the grow lights or any other kind of incandescent or LED lights makes all the difference. It really does.
So Sonia and Paula, Russell has suggested, and I saw this somewhere else yesterday as well, that using a gentle fan can help because it encourages the plants to grow a little bit stronger. And I was wondering whether that's, is that just sort of the thing that people are trying this year, or have you all tried that and had success?
I have not, mostly because I don't have an adequate fan that would be, the setup that I have. I would have to put a bunch of them out the different shelves, and I don't have the patience for that. But I know that greenhouse growers often utilize fans to make sure that the airflow is adequate, that the seedlings get stronger, and it also can help with that damping off problem that I had mentioned if you have good airflow. So you can also just either blow on them or like run your hand over them a little bit gently to kind of get them, toughen them up a little bit, and just pet your plants. Yeah, pet your plants. Is another way to be very gentle because they're.
Well, you're talking to them.
Giving
them their daily pep talk. Come on, little guys. You give them a little bit of a wave.
That's right. That's right. Community.
You can also rotate your tray towards the sun, so it'll get even amount and it'll keep moving back and forth, which also helps strengthen the stem.
Great point. Thanks, Jen.
So Sonia, the other question that we got that's really relevant to what you were talking about was whether or not you can plant the seeds that you did your germination test with in the paper towels or things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're going to want to make sure that there's a good root and shoot, as they say, sort of at the top and the bottom kind of coming out, but you can either just plant the paper towel. I've done that sometimes with smaller seeds, or very, very carefully extract the seed. Just be really careful so that you're not ripping it, because it sometimes gets entwined. So the best option really is to just plant the whole thing with the snip out pieces of paper towel and plop that in and make sure that it's at the right depth that if you have a little bit of a shoot, you're not going to cover it up completely, but make sure that the seed itself is in the ground. So yeah, that's a great way to, if it's germinated, might as well use it, pop it in the ground. So definitely good question.
Great. I think we're ready to move on to Paula's part then.
Let me move over here and hand it over to Ms. Paula.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to start by saying that this calendar, which is aimed at March, just the month of March, is really reasonably accurate for those of us who live in what we call Zone 6. Now, many of you know what zones are, but in case some of you do not, gardeners for a long time have divided up different climates in this country and abroad, in other countries also, for those of you who are not in the United States, into zones. And much of the mid-Atlantic and even the coastal part of New England and certainly a lot of Virginia are in a zone which is moderate, about zone 6. If you are in a warmer climate, say in Atlanta or down in Florida, your number will be higher. If you are like my daughter in Montana, you may be up in zone 4, a much lower number. So all of these recommendations and suggestions about the calendar are aimed at those of us in zone 6. But all you have to do if you are in a different zone is to add a suitable number of weeks or subtract a suitable number of weeks. That is, if you are in Atlanta, as one of our participants said, she's already done some of the things that we don't do until March. She's probably done already, and then others will be waiting until April to do these things. So there's a few activities that I'll just highlight. And I'm going to start with my favorite, which is prowling the garden. You may remember that I talked a little bit about prowling the garden, but in this particular instance, it's the details. It's the really noticing and observing that you want to do. You want to look and see if the weeds are coming. I've done that myself in my own garden, and I see the first of the dandelions. And but what I do also see very nicely is my favorite weed to eat, which is bitter cress, or it's not bitter actually, winter cress, which is very much like watercress. And that beautiful rosettes are already coming up. But you are going to want to take care of those weeds while they're still young. You may, if you are planning on a container garden, now is a very good time for you to position your pots, or at least look at the sunshine, find out where it's going to fall down, and get them ready for going in the place that you're going to want to start seeding. This particular picture shows one of my large containers where I have started seeds, and the seedlings are up. This was actually last year. My seedlings are not up yet like that. This is probably another right at the end of the month. If you are planting or already have blackberries, raspberries, perhaps blueberries, now is the perfect time, March, to prune them appropriately to the length that you want them. Before the spring growth starts, now is the time also for your trees and shrubs. If you want to do any thoughtful pruning with them, now is the perfect month. Garden cleanup and composting, of course. Perhaps you left some of the dead flower stalks for the birds and for some of the wildlife over the winter. Now is a good time to start tidying up when you think it's just really beginning to, maybe more towards the end of March. Now is the time that you can sow some seeds outside. Early March in zone 6, our zone in the Shenandoah Valley, peas and parsley go in. I have actually planted my peas outside. I've actually planted my parsley a little bit inside, and I'm going to start planting some outside. The temperature I think I spoke of before. I have tested my soil temperature, and I have noticed with interest, because somebody mentioned this, that it does make a difference after all what time of day you test your temperature. I've pronged in my thermometer and left it for a little while, and then gone to see that in the afternoon it can reach 50 degrees, which is very favorable for a number of seeds. Whereas this morning when I went out, we had a cool night. It was only about 42 degrees, but still all right for the peas. So we hope that that will be very helpful. By mid-March, in another couple of weeks, greens of all sorts, spinach and kale, can be put in and will do well outside. Late March, I would be planting beets and lettuce outside directly. So prepare the soil surface for sowing seeds. Next week, I will be talking a little bit about, because we'll be talking about weeding and so on, I will be talking about some favorable tools. But really, at this point, if you are going to sow your pea seeds, you just want to make sure that wherever you're going to plant them, you have used a hoe preferably, or a hand tool, to get the seed, the surface clear of weeds, and then rake it so it's fairly fine. And then of course, plant at the proper depth by looking at your seed packets. Such a useful place for finding the information that will help you be really successful. And then with maybe the tip of your hoe, you can make a V-shaped, and I'm thinking about in-ground now. It's a little different in a container, of course. You can make a V-shaped furrow and plant your peas in a row if that's what you do, and they should do very nicely. I have to confess that my pea seedlings are not up yet, although I planted them about 4 days ago, but I didn't really expect them to be up yet. It has been cold. So this is just a little bit of some reminders for what you might be able to do this month. And if you do it now, it really will be a very nice start to the season for you. So prowl your garden and enjoy every minute of it. I will mention here that next week, I will be producing for you a little more detailed calendars for April and for May, so that we'll take you at least through the spring with the various very enjoyable chores that you have to do in the garden. I hope that you will get a good start. Thank you.
That is a great segue for a little teaser for next week, session 3. We've got lots of good stuff coming up. We're going to talk more about weeds and some examples of, weed is just a plant that's in the wrong place. So what might those look like in your garden? Insects, good and bad. Most of them are good, as it turns out, but we'll be discussing sort of who are they and what will they do in your yard, in your garden. Diseases, how to avoid those, harvesting, and then, like Paula said, the rest of the calendar to kind of get you going for the spring. So we do hope that you will join us next week to talk about all these lovely things. And I think with that, and we can take some more questions, team, if there's other items from the Q&A.
So Joe would like to know if there's a guide for how much ground area per person you're attempting to feed.
That's a great question.
I've actually seen studies where they do basically how many plants to plant per family. And I'm not sure if that was in one of my permaculture books or one of my old gardening books, but it doesn't go into square footage. It goes into how many plants. So you need 5 potato plants, 10 tomato plants, whatever. I found that they were overestimating, but also a lot of this information is based on when people only got their food from their own garden. So I think it's going to be really dependent on how much your family eats. And I'm sure you can Google that question and find a myriad of different answers, and it's just going to be experimentation. There was one year that I got over 200 pounds of cucumbers from 3 vines, and then the next year I planted 3 vines and got next to nothing. So it really depends on your harvest and the environment and what happens and what bugs you get and so on. But
you have to think about what you like to eat and what your neighbors like to eat. Because I have
how many zucchini can you share?
Try to give me hundreds of pounds of zucchini.
Yep.
One zucchini plant goes a long way, but they come in packs of 6. So beginner planters put in 6 zucchini plants, and they're up to their ears, and none of their friends will answer their phones. So
the dreaded zucchini bomb.
You can also buy a 6-pack of vegetables. Like I plant on my deck because I live in the woods and there's deer. So I only plant on my deck. So does my friend Kate. So she and I go shopping together. We get a 6-pack and we split it, or we find a third person to give some of those zucchinis to, because I'm good with one plant. So think about that. But also, what are your, if you're, don't grow tomatoes if your family doesn't eat tomatoes. But if your family are tomato people, the least you're going to get is some good tomatoes, or you may get the bumper crop where I brought a giant bowl of beautiful yellow tomatoes. I probably had 100 extra. I brought them to work one day. Everybody took tomatoes home. So, it's hard to say exactly what, but a cautionary tale.
It's true. I grew okra one year because they're beautiful flowers, and I like pretty much everything. I just couldn't get into the okra, and so I ended up giving it away. But I realized that there's also ornamental hibiscus okra type plants, so that I don't actually get the fruit. But you be careful what you wish for, because sometimes you'll end up with it's a good problem to have too much, and you can always donate, to Grow a Row or to the food banks. But if you're starting to zucchini bomb your neighbors, you might actually have a problem.
I think the other thing to keep in mind also is that some of your plants will be cool weather plants and some of your plants will be hot weather plants. And so you want to think about, Paula's going to talk about the calendar next week, and it's really important to make sure that you have succession of your plantings as well, because your lettuce is going to poop out on you at some point early in the summer. So you want to have something else that can take its place, because otherwise you will eat like a queen for the first couple of months, and then you'll be back to going to the grocery store for your vegetables. So, you know, it's not a one and done kind of thing. It's a full summer long extravaganza of fruits and vegetables.
I'd like to add something about that lettuce, quote, pooping out in the summer. That's true in our zone here in Virginia, and in our very hot, dry summer. There's almost a period in the summer, a couple of months, where some things have a real struggle. But I would also say, from my long time ago English background, that's not the case in England. The lettuce goes right through the summer. So you will get to know your own garden and your own climate if you're just beginning. And you will find out that, in fact, if you do live in zone 6 or anywhere near us, that thinking about, and this is a little advanced and we're not talking about it, but there is such a thing as planning a fall garden. And quite honestly, some plants do even better in the fall as it gets cooler and cooler and cooler than they do in the spring. Unfortunately, we can't cover it, but it might be something that you might even want to look up if you get enthusiastic and feel sad as your, for example, your lettuce will. How are you going to plant lettuce in the summer? And I could give you some tips about it, but I won't do that right now.
And Brenda mentions that sometimes you have to share with the squirrels too. I find them to be one of my main nemesis in the summer. And yeah, you can try to keep them away, try to deter them, but you're gonna end up having to share. So get used to that too. So plan for some squirrel sharing and deer sharing and bunny sharing and other critters that may be in your neighborhood.
A groundhog less than 20 feet from my garden.
Groundhog.
They love their organic produce. I had one a couple years ago too. He left us a good Yelp review, I think. It's like all the produce in the salad bar is great. It's right at the front door. It's awesome.
I thought we could address this question that was partly answered, but somebody wanted to know about starting their seeds in a small greenhouse outside. I mean, that's kind of, that could be a expensive undertaking, but anyway, wanted to know what y'all thought.
My friend has one of these that she got somewhere along the way. It's almost like it's like a set of shelves that kind of has a little plastic house that kind of zips up, and you can it's actually a nice way to get your plants and your seeds started early. I would imagine you're going to still need a light source in there unless you're putting them out during the day and bringing them back in at night. So I don't know. I've never done that. I don't know if anybody else has experimented with those kinds of things, but you're going to still want to make sure you've got a good light source for that.
Temperature as well.
So I have used those when the nighttime temperatures are just not quite warm enough for tomatoes and peppers.
Yeah.
I found that if I tuck it up against the west side of my house, that it stays warmer in there overnight, and it gets a lot of good sun during the day, because I too have a beautiful deep porch that faces south, which means that all the good light in my house is not good enough for tomato seedlings.
Yeah.
So I've used one of those. They're sort of a portable little greenhouse, and you can move things around if you need to. It's lightweight enough that you can move them around. But it's the kind of thing you've got to experiment with and see if it'll work for you.
Yeah.
I saw some questions about mixing vegetables and flowers in the garden, and can you do that? And I answered briefly just to say that the English have had cottage gardens for centuries, where they really, really mingle up the vegetables and the flowers. So of course, absolutely you can grow them. And if you do go for a lot of nice native flowers that are good pollinators, you are going to have a marvelous crop of vegetables in amongst them. And of course, some vegetables are just beautiful. Swiss chard, if you do the ruby Swiss chard with the red stalks, it's just gorgeous. And tomatoes can be very beautiful if they're not too large. And think about it, parsley and fennel and dill, all kinds of plants and herbs are very lovely, and they can easily be mixed up. And I think, Sonia, you said you have was it Sonia who had a front garden?
Yep.
So you should be answering this question.
Well, I don't have an HOA, so I have a little bit more flexibility, but I mean, that's where the sun is. So that's where I garden. And so I've got a combination of all the things that were on that slide, of fruits and vegetables and flowers and herbs, and all intermingled, you know, and having the flowers in there and attracts the pollinators. A lot of flowers are edible too. Nasturtiums are delicious. We talked about that last time. I think they're my favorites. Marigolds apparently are edible as well, and lots of other ones. And a lot of flowers also have medicinal properties. Echinacea, you can brew the root into a tea. So there's all kinds of great ways that you can use those flowers yourself, and then they're great for the pollinators. They make the yard look lovely. People expect to see flowers out front. So I have a really vast combination of things, and you know, I was joking about the marigolds are the only things that look good in August when it gets really hot and dry inside the Beltway, and then in the depths of summer when I don't even want to go out in the yard. It can be a little grubby out there. It's not the most beautiful all year round, but adding flowers in can kind of, that's sort of edible landscaping. There's a great book by that same title that really talks about how to mix textures and colors and all kinds of interesting stuff together in a small space to make it pleasing to the eye as well as beneficial for the plants. So yeah, let's take get our satisfaction survey going, our last poll. Thank you, Katie. And folks, if you have any lingering questions, do let us know. We hope that you will join us for part 3 next week, and perhaps for some of our other upcoming events. We're very excited to be doing in-person events again, and we'll be doing so with caution, but looks like we're able to roll out some in-person stuff. And so continue to check our website, check our Facebook, our social media is a great place to stay up to date with what we've got coming up. We're busy little bees within the next couple of months, so we'd love to see you out and about at some of our other events and online at some of our webinars as well. Tell a friend, join us as a member if you want to help support our efforts. We welcome your engagement.
And hopefully we'll see all of you next week, and some friends as well. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for filling out our satisfaction poll at the end. Unfortunately, the way that we leave Zoom is very abrupt. And so I just wanted to say thanks and try to be as gracious as possible. We will see you next week at the same time. Thank you to Deb and Sonia and Paula for their presentation today. And as always, to my very capable Zoom team. We really appreciate all of you. Thank you for being here today. See you all next week.